All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Puget Systems podcast. This time, we're joined by Matt Bach, our senior labs, one of our senior labs technicians. Today, we're just talking about, it's been a couple weeks now, but I recently launched PugetBench for Creators version 1.0, which is super cool because I think this is probably one of the coolest things we've done so far in my time at Puget, because we have like a full cohesive, it's not just like a plug-in or anything. This is like a desktop app that is going to have all of our centralized, or it's like a centralized place for all of the benchmarks eventually. Right now it's just Premiere Pro and Photoshop, right?
Yeah. Cool. And it's going to be a lot of work to get stuff in. It's really excited to finally get this stuff across some of these finish lines because
it's been a long time coming, right?
Yeah, I guess just to start off, even I guess to start off, what is it? And then I kind of want to give it a little bit of a history of the background of it, just because I think it's really interesting how this all came about. So the short of it is, our benchmarks, our eventual goal is to have different umbrellas that we put things under, but the main one we're focusing on now is creators, so like content creation, video, photo kind of stuff. And we have benchmarks for Photoshop, After Effects, Premiere Pro, Lightroom Classic, and DaVinci Resolve. So we have five. Two of them we've gotten into this new creators app for, like you said, Photoshop and Premiere Pro. And the whole point of it is there are very few good benchmarks for professional workloads out there. There's a ton of game stuff. There are some for rendering tends to be popular things.
Like C4D and stuff.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. But there's really not as much stuff for video editors or photographers, motion graphic artists. So our whole point is let's get some real world, or at least as close as we can get, to real world benchmarks, so that if someone is thinking about buying this CPU or that CPU or this laptop versus that laptop, or even a Mac or a MacBook Pro versus a PC Mac or a desktop, what is the actual performance going to be for them? And I mean, it's never going to be perfect. Everyone's workflow is different, but we can at least give something that's better than looking at gaming benchmarks or CPU rendering benchmarks.
Right.
It's at least should be closer. So that's the whole goal of our benchmarks is, hey, let's actually be able to test these real workflows that people are doing every day, that we know people are investing $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 in workstations.
Right.
And, until we started doing this stuff, it was just I think that's probably right.
Yeah, that's crazy. Part of it is even some of the other productivity sort of benchmarks I see from other places, it is a lot more just synthetic, I guess. They put they just try and slam the CPU as hard as they can, or that kind of a thing. Or I know I've seen a few things where it's Handbrake, or those are the sort of codec translation softwares and things, and they time it out and that sort of a deal. But how close is that really to
great? I mean, if that's what you're doing, absolutely, it's terrific. If you're using Handbrake a bunch, you gotta look at Handbrake benchmarks. But I think what people don't quite get, or maybe they haven't until recently, is that Handbrake is doing encoding, or decoding and then re-encoding, transcoding of media, but that's very different than Premiere Pro when you do an export. It could be the same source codec and the same destination codec, but behind the hood or under the hood, it's very different in how it works. And I think even if you look between our Premiere Pro benchmark and our DaVinci Resolve benchmark, you just look at those two and you're okay, it's very different in how it uses hardware. And that's two competing products doing essentially the same thing. And the further you go out from that, it could line up. There are some things that I even use our benchmark. I'll use our Photoshop benchmark as an analog for lightly threaded other applications. It works okay as long as you understand how things work in the back end, but it's never going to be as good as the actual application you're doing.
Yeah.
If you mind turning on the screen share, I'll go ahead and even just show. So this is the PugetBench for Creators app. Houston said briefly, this is no longer where you have to download a plugin off of the Adobe marketplace, install that plugin, and download all these asset files that we need because you need all the
Mhm.
source videos and
Oh,
images and all that kind of stuff, and then run it. This now it does most of that stuff also, but it does it all for you.
cool.
So for example, like we're in Photoshop here, I'm missing the assets. I can just click a button, download the assets. It downloads it. It unzips it. Cool. You didn't have to go anywhere else to download.
Oh, that's rad.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, when you hit start test, Photoshop actually doesn't have to install anything in the background. It's using scripts, but like Premiere Pro, it actually does install an extension in the background, and
Okay.
then it does stuff, and then it gets rid of it afterwards. But still, it's a one click. Like you can just click go, and now it's running. And if I let it
Ah,
go, it'd be 20 minutes or something, but it'll just go. So I'm just gonna cancel this one.
yeah.
But so yeah, it's just like it does it for you rather than having to manage a whole bunch of extra stuff.
Nice. Now, I did see a question, not in the chat right now, but on the social media previously. The plugins are no longer an option, right? You can no longer
Yeah,
get those. You can't do it the other
you
way. This is the way now.
you can. We are still providing what are called ZXP packages. It's basically the way that you can provide a plugin outside of the Adobe Marketplace. So you're
Okay.
not installing it through Creative Cloud, you're installing it through a ZXP installer. We do still have those. And in fact, here I can kind of show where they are. So we also finally have landing pages now. It's actually in our navigation. If you go to Publications PugetBench, it'll take you to these pages.
Nice.
And if you wanted to use the old, like say Premiere Pro, you can go
Mhm.
into the Premiere Pro page, and then down at the very bottom, we've got legacy benchmark versions.
Oh, okay.
So if you want the old ones, there's the ZXP plugins. There's all the test assets you need. It only goes back to version 9.92. So some of the
Okay.
really old stuff, yeah, we don't have those anymore. But I don't think those would even work with any of the versions of Premiere Pro that are out.
Okay.
So if anyone needs to do them, absolutely you can do that. We made sure we had this available because I know there's a lot of people, especially in like press and like hardware reviews, where they
Mm,
want to do the same thing for like multiple years because
sure.
they recycle results. Um, I'm not a huge fan of recycling results, but I totally understand why people have to do it, especially because a lot of smaller like reviewers, I don't think they get stuff permanently. Like they get a loaner from
Oh,
AMD or Intel, and then they got to return it. So like
yeah.
they have to recycle results. So in those
Makes
cases,
sense.
we are going to provide those. And yeah, those are on there again on like the Premiere Pro page. Photoshop, we're doing the exact same thing.
Okay.
After Effects, Lightroom Classic, Dimension Resolve, those are still in the old system. But once they move over into the Creators app,
Mm,
same thing. We'll make the previous versions available for a while. At a certain point, I don't want to, populate our file server with stuff that no longer even works.
sure.
But
No, that makes
we'll
sense.
keep an eye on like the number of downloads and cut it off when it makes sense.
Something else I noticed too, and I may be jumping ahead on your presentation here, but the scoring is different. That was another question that had come up, like, oh, hey, on version 0.98, I'm getting like 12,000, but on the 1.0, I'm getting 1,500. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, okay. First of all, if you want to know what's going on in any of these pages, there are update notes
Oh, snap!
and
Oh, yeah, very
usually
well
talk about
documented.
exactly why. In this case, we did a couple of different things. We moved to a different type of scoring. I don't think we did this a little bit, like one version back in Premiere, but in Photoshop, this is the first time we did it, where we moved to a geomean.
Okay,
So before we were doing like, what is the performance this run versus a reference result? Like we ran it on a 12900K with a 3080. Okay, what's the percent difference? And that's like your score. So
okay,
like if it's 12% faster, 112% the performance, the score was 112.
I see.
That works okay. It does some weird stuff if you have like a really small result, like 1.1 FPS versus
Mhm.
1.2 FPS. It doesn't really scale well for that versus like 110 FPS versus 112 FPS.
Oh, okay.
So like it's not totally great for that. The other thing too is if we decide we wanted to add another test, we have to basically go back and redo all of the reference results because things have
Oh,
changed so much. You can't really just
sure.
like update one. I mean, you kind of can, but not well. So a geomean just kind of removes all of those kind of things. Like bigger, smaller results don't really matter. Geomean fixes all that kind of stuff. We can add a test in, and it doesn't like change all of the other scoring. So that's what we're doing now. We're doing a geomean of in the case of like Premiere Pro, we do separate geomean for the encoding and the processing, which is basically decoding, but it's not
Hmm.
pure enough for us to call it that. For each of the codec types, and then we combine those together into the codec scores, and then we combine those together into the overall score. And all of that
Oh,
stuff with
nice.
geomeans. The couple of things we also did change though is we added a scoring coefficient. This is very
Hmm.
standard for this type of benchmarks when you're doing a geomean. The point of that is to bring things kind of all in line because when you do a geomean, you could have like for raw results, it's going to be a really low number because raw is a lot harder to process. A lot of
Okay.
the tests are going to be giving like 20 FPS. Long GP, if you have hardware decoding and encoding, it's a lot easier. So you're going to have things more like 40 FPS. So
Mhm.
kind of bring everything kind of in line, not even just within Premiere, but across all of our benchmarks. We have these scoring coefficients, and these we arrive at by like, okay, an upper mid-range system, we want this score to be somewhere around 100.
Okay.
Cool. And then we also have another scoring efficient on top of the overall score. This is mostly just to make it so that this number is a lot bigger.
Sure.
This is
Yeah.
really all it is because you want to make sure that like your overall score, the main score that people should care about, is a bigger number,
Sure.
just psychologically. And the thing we changed in these
Well,
1.0 versions is we also increased it by a factor of 10. So before this scoring coefficient was basically 10, now it's 100.
okay.
The point behind that is so that if people are like on a benchmark and they're looking at a score for Photoshop, on the 1.0 version, this is giving a score around 6,000.
Hmm.
On this system, on the previous version, the beta versions, which were different tests, different scoring, and everything, the score would have been somewhere closer to like 600. So
Oh,
this way, the idea is hopefully people don't mix up the beta versions that were like a work in progress. We change scoring, we change tests all the time to the 1.0s, which now should be stable for hopefully multiple years, and try to compare them against each other. If it's off
okay.
by a factor of 10, hopefully people say, like, whoa, something's not right, versus just like, wow, it's that much faster now. Like, no,
Yeah,
it's
that's
wrong.
what I was seeing was, or and I may have had those numbers mixed up where like it was 1,200 on the older one and now it's 12,000 on this one or something like that. But
Yeah, something like that.
that's yeah, and I feel like doing the multiply by 100, it's a little bit more granular might be the right word because like if
Yeah,
you
a little
dropped off
bit.
that seven, at the 6,097, you'd get just 609 before, and that might make a big difference, or that might make a decision difference for somebody.
Yeah, probably not really. I mean,
No, I mean
honestly,
it's a little
for our
too many
internal
decimals.
stuff, so the margin of error for these kind of scores,
Mm.
we're down to somewhere around 2% is
Oh,
what we
nice.
typically see. So I think we publicly, I think we might even
I
say
did
it in
see
here.
something about
Yeah,
that. Yeah, there you go.
run variance of about 1 to 2% for the overall score. The major scores around 5%. Individual tests could be more.
Sure.
It's just you have one test and like Windows Defender activates. Well, okay, we'll
Yeah.
throw a little bit out. But still, this 1 to 2% is pretty darn good. But
I
that
would say
lets you
so.
know that like yeah, you can kind of round things a little bit. So sometimes when I'm doing our internal analysis of results, I think we round everything to the nearest 50, maybe even 100, because then it groups stuff up a lot easier. Because if you try to have things too specific, like it's really hard to pull meaningful numbers out when like it's all just divided by one number kind of a thing.
Sure.
So so yeah, so we've got this. These are all in here. Mentioned After Effects is coming soon. DaVinci
Nice.
Resolve is also coming soon. Those are the two we're probably going to be working on come 2024.
Okay.
They shouldn't be too
That makes
bad.
sense.
After Effects is going to be very similar to Premiere.
Mhm.
DaVinci Resolve is actually a whole bunch of command line things, so
Oh,
shouldn't be too bad. um,
That's neat. I
yeah,
would think that'd be maybe a little easier.
it should be. Sometimes you're doing things just straight from command line because it's using a undocumented feature that Resolve has to do performance testing. It's mostly
Oh,
just because like it works and it's worked great, but like there's really no point for most end users to use it. So why like muddy up their documentation with it?
oh, okay.
Um, but we're using that. But since you don't have complete control over the app, sometimes it's a little bit hard to do like error detection and things like
Okay.
that. But cool. But we're working on those too. So hopefully we'll be able to have those both integrated. It'll probably take like a quarter for each. So maybe to Resolve in Q1, After Effects in Q2. Lightroom is going to be the one that's going to be, we're going to have to look at and really see what we want to do. Lightroom, we do a lot of funny business right now as far as like external automation from keyboard and mouse macros and
Hmm.
pixel watching and stuff like that. And we can make that
Wow.
work on Windows. Mac OS is a lot tougher.
I
There's a lot more
mean,
like security stuff in Mac OS, and it changes sometimes with new versions. And
do we really need a Lightroom Classic benchmark though? I mean, as long as you've got a discrete graphics card and a decent CPU, you're pretty much good to go, right?
yeah, I mean that is true. And that's one of the areas where it kind of diverges from what we want for ourselves versus what we see a need for in the industry as a whole.
Hmm.
Um, because like you said,
Cool.
like for us, it's like, yeah, cool. We use basically our minimum spec workstations, and it's fine. Like,
Yeah.
you're
I
you're
mean,
good.
I would admit I was being a little flippant because it didn't just raise as a question in my head of like, well, what kind of struggles are somebody who spends most of their time in Lightroom having? And I
Hmm.
don't want to be dismissive of that. So there's clearly a need,
No,
or it wouldn't be on the
yeah,
list. So, but
yeah, but I think
it
at this
made me think about
point,
that.
yeah, but because when we started off, a lot of these benchmarks, hardware was in a very different place. So for like Lightroom Classic, even things like importing a large number of images, think like an event photographer,
Hmm.
doing a large number of edits, just scrolling through those images, like it takes time for it to like load the preview version and then the full version.
Sure.
It definitely was like laggy, but now on desktops, yeah, it's pretty much we've hit critical mass, and like until there's some new revolution in like the megapixels of images or some new crazy raw format that's way
Hmm.
harder to process, it's not going to really be a big deal. But like I said, like that's our need, but there are all the people buying laptops or ultrabooks,
Right.
or maybe with Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic, there's like an iPad version. Well,
Oh,
man, when you get down to that level, like there is still the performance considerations. There's still those things, and yeah, we don't do lower end laptops or super low end desktops or anything, but there's a lot of people out there that buy those systems, and so for us, the Lightroom Classic I think is one of the examples of where if we keep building it and developing it, it's not going to be as much for us to use internally. It's going
hmm,
to be for us to help the industry out there as a whole,
nice.
which will be really cool that we can like finally, we have enough license sales, we have enough other income coming in directly through this benchmark work that we don't have to fund the development through workstation sales, which is
Yeah.
terrific because that's ideally, I mean, I guess in my mind that is ideally what we'd want to be happening, because then there's no longer any of those concerns about like, oh well, yeah, but you're choosing those tests because they look better on PC versus Apple. Like
Oh,
we
sure.
never do that.
No.
But I'm sure there's some of that perception out there because we are a PC workstation manufacturer. So in my mind, the better we can do about siloing a little bit,
Hmm.
and like, okay, the point of this is to answer the questions for end users regardless of hardware. That's always going to be, in my mind, a good idea.
Yeah. This is a comment that has come up fairly often, and I know the answer here, but I want to put this out here. Nicholas Johansson on the Facebook says, "Hey, great benchmark for us users. Really appreciate it. It would be great with a top 100 list, like a top 100 for Premiere would be great for me to compare different systems." And I agree. A leaderboard,
Yeah.
and I know it might be a little I don't know. I I've been out of software and web development for a long time now, so I'm not unsure as to the complication involved in like sorting through the data that we have. But even if it's unsortable, but yeah, like a leaderboard of some sort would be rad.
We that is It was something we were hoping to actually have with this 1.0 release. So right now, if you go to our PugetBench for Creators page, We have a big button at the top that's browse results. Right here, browse results. And right now it takes you to this page, which says it's under development. It's an old style. It doesn't really match a lot of the rest of our website because it's an older page. Where basically you can do some searching in here. So like you could search for like 14900K, and it shows you all the 14900K results. The problem is you can't search beyond that. You can't say, oh, I want 14900K and the 90s, or I want to compare this to a 7950X, or anything like that. It just like doesn't work. This whole page was a minimum viable product project for when we started doing result uploading years ago, and we just haven't had bandwidth to come through and give it a major overhaul. That is planned for this year, because we do want exactly that. Like what I want ideally is you come into this page, it'll only be like Photoshop. Cool. So it'll be limited to Photoshop, and then you'll have a drop down for versions, and it like groups versions by when the tests change. So we'd have like 1.0 through 1.8 would be a single drop down because we never change any of the testing, we never change any of the scoring. And then maybe there would be a 2.0 through 2.8. And so you can select by like test group. And same thing actually I want to do for the application versions, because one of the problems we have is since we're running straight on the versions of Photoshop or Premiere you have installed, Adobe puts out updates every month, two.
Right.
And so it's really hard to know, like, okay, well, cool, here's a result for 25.2, but is that the same thing as 25.0?
Yeah, what did they change or something?
Yeah, what did they change? Did it impact performance? So one of my goals for next year is actually to build up a handful of systems and just have it, watch for an update. If there's an update, run the benchmark a whole bunch of times. And then if it's, the beyond 5% variance or whatever, it notifies us so that we like make a new version grouping. So that for this application drop down, it would be like Photoshop 24.6 through Photoshop 25.8. And so you can group things, because right now there's just so many versions. And then have it have a leaderboard style where you can search for specific products. Like I'm searching for 14900K here, great. But also it would just have a chart right here that would just be, okay, here's the top CPU, 14900K, and here's the score, and then the next CPU, next one. And I would also hopefully have something like, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the overall score? Are you looking at the long GOP score? Because something like long GOP, 14900K is going to be a lot higher performance because of quick sync. Versus raw, where something like Threadripper Pro is going to be a lot higher performance. So that kind of thing. Absolutely. I think we really need to do it. Because man, we have tens of thousands of results. I think we might be hitting like 100,000 or something now.
Wow.
And so like we got to make use of this data. This is just
I'm excited for like 3D Mark style competitions. I'd love to see like the nerds out there like Jay's 2 cents and Kyle and whatnot going bonkers with liquid cooling, but I'd love to see somebody like we built this beast machine and its sole purpose is long GOP decoding, and we've got the best score ever because we threw $100,000 whatever at this ultra machine. Would be I just think that'd be so much fun. That'd be cool. I mean, they're one of the difficulties with that, like one of the only reasons why like I'm not super excited about something like that is because you can tune the application in stupid ways to make it really good for like one thing, and then but it's like not really. Like you basically just took what our benchmark is testing and like tweak the crap out of it, but then like it doesn't really apply to real world. It's okay. Neither do those top
it can't be
3D Mark scores either.
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
I want to hit this question because I think this is a good important one. Kyle O'Neill on the YouTube says, sorry if the answer is obvious or if it's answered on the website, but do you need an Adobe license for every program you want to test, or can you test your hardware with the benchmark for Adobe software you do not yet have a license for?
Technically, you do need a license because it's launching Photoshop. It's running the actual application. But it should work just fine with a trial license. You can get I believe it's a 30-day trial through Adobe. I think I have no idea idea how they track whether you have multiple trials or not, but I'm sure you could just use a different email or something.
We're not a lawyer. We don't recommend,
yeah.
subverting the free trial stuff or breaking TOS in any way.
No, absolutely not. But the other thing too with Adobe is I've had really good success with like their marketing departments of being like, hey, if you're a reviewer or something and you want to be testing it, man, reach out to Adobe. I have no idea what the best way is. Probably on social media, and see if they can get you a press kind of license. They do that for us. Like we have a great partnership with Adobe, and they provide quite a few licenses actually for us, so that we can test like hardware when it comes out and put into articles, and all that kind of stuff. Because I mean, I think in our case, we're definitely providing Adobe value, so they're helping us by giving us value of licenses. And if you're doing anything for public, I'm sure. I mean, I guess I can't speak for them, but I think it's worth the effort of just asking. It never hurts to ask. But either way, a 30-day trial should work just fine with our benchmarks as well.
I also had a question about the results, because we internally and in production and stuff, we run these benchmarks, on the systems that we send out. Are those also uploaded? Like, are those marked like, hey, this was like an official result?
Yeah, they haven't migrated over to the 1.0 versions yet in production, because production is a lot more about consistency over time. Like they don't really care as much about performance in the latest version of After Effects. They care, is this system performing as expected in After Effects? So they're much more concerned about keeping it the same for as long as possible. But yeah, that's what this green check mark is. It's basically we ran it. And there will be some results in 1.0. Those are basically the ones we're doing up in labs. But yeah, that's what this check mark is. And we'll have some way of showing that when we have this, this whole page revamped to like charts and stuff, so that you can say like, yeah, only show me the Puget verified is what we call it. And basically all that means is we're not doing any overclocking. We know our systems aren't thermal throttling. We're not doing anything weird. We don't have a bunch of applications running in the background, 5 antivirus programs because, so that's basically all this really delineates, because if you don't have that, man, apparently a lot of 14900Ks, they must be doing a lot in production right now. Because where's one that isn't?
Wow, yeah.
Here we go. Here's one that isn't.
It is.
Oh, it's Metashape. That's a weird one.
What?
Metashape again.
That's awesome.
Okay, here we go. Result. Like, we have no idea, this guy, if he's overclocking his CPU. That's really not something we can detect. Eventually, we might want to add some sort of like checkbox for, hey, you uploaded a result. Was there CPU overclocking? Was there GPU overclocking? The hard part is, though, that like a lot of systems that people build for themselves are overclocking. They just don't know it. Most stuff has auto overclocking enabled out of the box.
So. We've got some good articles about that.
Yeah, we do
from the past. Yeah,
but either way, so yeah, we'll have some way of flagging. Again, same thing. Where like, is this something we ran, or is this something that was publicly run, or do you just want to see both? Because even the other thing we want to do is like, okay, if we have a bar here for 14900K, we want to let people click into it and then have it show them like a bell curve of like, okay, well, most of the results were here. There were some, down here. So you can see like, okay, that's a weird high result. The mean or average is somewhere around here, kind of a thing. But you get some really interesting things out of those curves. One of the things I remember we found was a lot of the Intel CPUs in particular would have 2 points or 2 peaks. And it was the people who have hardware, their iGPU enabled for hardware decoding and encoding, and the people who have it off. And like you get 2 little peaks. Yeah. The other one we have with the 12th, 13th, and 14th gen is it DDR4 or is it DDR5? So you get 2 kind of peaks there too.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's really kind of interesting to look at kind of those curves over time. And it's never super clean. Like you can only have very clean curves when you have tens of thousands results for that specific CPU. Like we're probably never going to have that much. Like this is not as widespread of a benchmark as something like Geekbench or PCMark.
I mean,
it's growing.
Now that it's super easy. It's way easier now. So maybe a few years from now we'll get some very
possibly.
Yeah. One more question
So
before we move on to licensing and stuff, because I want to make sure we touch on that. Cool VFX asks, always have a question about new Threadrippers in single core performance. Is it really that bad inside Nuke Houdini? Great to know. Thanks.
they've improved it a lot. Single core or single thread performance was terrible on like the first and second gen Threadrippers. Like they were just were not designed for that, and we didn't have all the turbo technologies that we have now. These newer ones, they're not up to the same level as like the consumer CPUs, Ryzen, Intel Core, but they are close.
The base clocks and stuff.
Yeah, we have articles for the new Threadrippers. We don't have the full articles for the new Threadripper Pros yet. Motherboards still aren't available. But we have for the new Threadrippers, and the Pros should be basically the exact same thing. I want to say there's something like 10% behind the consumer CPUs for lightly threaded stuff like Photoshop or Cinebench single core. So they're close. So if you need them for the multi-core performance for like you mentioned Houdini and stuff like Houdini simulations, cool. You're not giving up that much. Like a 10% difference is hard to tell. When you're sitting there doing things,
we're barely seeing that from one CPU generation to the next. Honestly,
So they're not exactly the same, but I mean, it makes sense. They've got like 96 cores and stuff. Like they're not going to be exactly the same. The bigger issue with them is those lightly threaded applications. Some of them, if they're not coded well, they don't work well with CPUs that have more than 32 cores. Windows splits up into processor groups, and if it's not coded well to handle that, you could be like, it has to cross those groups, and that causes weird, bad performance issues. That's one of the reasons why like the 64 core and 96 core Threadrippers are slower in apps like Photoshop than the 24 or 32 core. They're way more expensive, but they can be way slower. Okay.
So we have mentioned it's free to download and stuff, but there comes with some caveats.
I suppose some caveats. So one of the things, so I've got a license here already activated. I'll be
not for very much
this
longer.
License right after this stream, so don't worry about trying to copy it down because it won't work. But what this lets you do is a couple of different things. One, lets you turn off result uploading to the public database. The data of what your results are, so like all of this stuff is basically payment for the free version. That's how we gain value. Is your performance numbers go into our database, and they can be used more and more over time for doing big data performance analysis kind of stuff. And we don't track anything of like your system name, your credit card number saved on your clipboard, or any of that kind of stuff. Like we in fact,
it looks like it's just basically the information. Like if you go to my PC and the system info, oh, there you go. You got it spelled out right there.
Yeah. So it's just like, what's the benchmark? What's the versions, the applications, basic hardware information, basically like name and like driver version kind of stuff, and then the results. That's it. So nothing identifying whatsoever. Pretty standard stuff for any benchmark, that's like phoning home or uploading results. But that's basically the payment for the free version. Because I mean, everyone's heard the whole thing where like if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. It's basically our version kind of a thing. Yeah. So that's the free version.
Hey, and that as an example of what we do use that information for internally, a good example of that is the Intel over the generations, Intel CPUs from what was it, from the 6000 series all the way to today, sort of a thing. That was built on the back of this data that we've collected from the benchmarks.
Yep. And the goal too is not to have that siloed into like something only we have access to. We have easier access to it because we have direct database access, so we can do custom searches and stuff. But all of that stuff, the intention is it's available to the public. So if someone else wanted to do a Intel generations over or Intel performance over the generations, if J2 Sense or whoever wants to do that, cool. They can just look in our database, find that data, put their story together about whatever it is they want to talk about, and there you go. Same thing you can do with Geekbench or PC Mark or all of those. So that data is tend to be open to everybody. But so if you have a license, though, first of all, we say that if you are commercial use, you should have a license.
What is
We
considered commercial use?
Anything where you're making money
Okay.
off of it.
Okay.
It's
So
one
like
of those
Tom's
terrible
Hardware or something
things.
like that, if they want, or if they were going to do it.
Yeah, technically, like reviewers would, although we do have a press license available. So on the same like license, purchasing page here, there's a press license thing. So like you can request a press license if you are press. We have licenses out to the big guys. We have licenses out to the small guys. Yeah, we really don't care. The only thing we say technically right now is we say it's in the USA. Um, Most of that is because we might even want to tweak that to be what it is, but most of that is because language barriers, not really for like support as much as we don't have full multi-language support in like the app or Photoshop and stuff, because if it's
Hmm.
in German, well, it we have to be looking for different things, and Photoshop is going to be returning different things.
Oh,
If
interesting.
it's
So
in
like if
German.
the language makes a difference, if
Mhm.
like say even if you were, if I had Photoshop set to Swedish or something, it would the results might come out funny or it might break or
It
something.
would just break,
Okay.
because we have triggers where we say like run this action,
Oof.
do this, and then it waits for a return of that action. But if that return is in some other language, we don't know what
That
we're
makes sense.
looking for, and we're
Variable
going to
names and
have to
stuff are
assume that it's an error, kind of a thing.
that makes
So
sense.
that's the main reason for that limitation for press license. But and we've made exceptions. Often it's just like, well, hey, do you understand all this? Cool, yeah, great.
Cool.
Um, but yeah, and then commercial use. So it's mostly targeted towards the Intels, the Nvidias, the
Yeah.
competitors in the workstation spaces, the Dells, Lenovo's, all of those kind of guys, because
You
they aren't like we're not going to get as much out of their data, because they're probably going to like have it turned off. That's the
sure.
other thing too. Like they probably don't want to be uploading data into the database. Cool, it satisfies a lot of their restrictions as well.
Yeah.
But it's just like our way of, technically they're kind of taking some of our business, so we just get a little bit back.
Yeah, why not? Plus,
Kind
hey,
of a
I
thing.
gotta say it's pretty cool seeing our name in the fine print on some of the like marketing slides and stuff when AMD's doing a presentation or whoever,
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty cool.
At this point, I know for sure AMD, Intel, and Nvidia have used our benchmarks as part of their launch day content. I think with Threadripper, we were even on like their big giant slides. When they do the big old presentation and stuff,
I
like
think
our
so, yeah.
benchmarks are on those, which is very, I don't know, interesting when like these things all started off as I'm lazy and I don't want to manually do stuff, so I'm just going to like start throwing together some scripts. And then over the course of 10 years, it's gotten to this point where like it's actually polished. We're actually
Hey.
hiring real developers to program it well versus my scripting approach at the very beginning and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so licensing, what it gives you,
Oh,
one,
here, let's go back to the checklist.
sure, yeah. One is result uploading. You can turn it off. Big reason for that is a lot of people who want to or who want to license are testing NDA hardware,
Mhm.
and so like we don't want leaks. We have additional filters on the back end where like we know what all the NVIDIA GPUs are that exist. Cool. We have a whitelist for that. We kind of know what some of the upcoming Intel stuff is. Like, some of it we even just guess. Like, we're going to guess that there's going to be a 15th gen. Cool. We'll add
Yeah,
in
right.
guesses for what we think it'll be. Sometimes we know what it actually is, then we can have exacts. But still, better to just like turn it off in those cases. But then it also adds the ability to do write to a CSV log file, a local log file, because a lot of those people, they want to run multiple runs, they want to be able to compile it, and so writing to a log file is a lot easier because then you can import it into Excel, do all your spreadsheety things.
Yeah.
Other things it gets you is we don't have this yet right now, but we'll eventually have like a beta branch. So as we're testing new things, like we might in Photoshop or Premiere, we might want to add like isn't there new like ProRes log or something that iPhones shoot or something? But like, hey, we might want to add a new codec there. So we'd have a beta branch that would have that, and like it's not something we would really encourage like reviewers to use because it's not going to be stable long term because we might
Sure.
change things constantly. But like, hey, we'll probably use it because we want to always be testing the latest ourselves, so we'll use that beta branch. Same thing with
Yeah.
like Intel or AMD or Lenovo or whoever. So it allows that kind of stuff. It allows, let's see in here, CLI automation.
Oh, very nice.
And so we have a whole section on that. CLI automation is in here, but it's basically just let's see. I think I even have one.
Hey, look
Yeah,
at
so
that.
you just say it. You can tell it like what do you want to run, what versions, what presets. We even have things like how many times do you want to run it? 'Cause a lot
that's
of
cool.
reviewers, they want to run it like 3 times. How many times do you want to rerun it if it breaks? Like if Photoshop crashes, how many times do you want to keep retrying before it
that's
just
nice
like gives up?
because like maybe it crashes at the same spot or maybe it doesn't. Like,
Yeah, it's the difference between, because if it's like a benchmark problem or like a system setup problem, it'll crash at the same place every time. But like we don't want to just halt and just like get stuck. Because I mean, we use these benchmarks ourselves, and we know how annoying it is when you start a benchmark run, you leave for the day, and you come back, you expect it to be done in the morning, and it like got stuck on like the second test. Like, ugh, it's terrible. So this handles that for you because I mean these are real world applications. They crash sometimes. So like we want it to be able to handle just like, oh yeah, a random crash, whatever. Who cares? Just redo it versus it's crashing a whole bunch of times. You know, give it errors. Result uploading, if you're doing command line, it by default does not upload results, so you can turn it on there. There's like some stuff for like timeouts. So like if it's a very low end ultrabook where like we did not intend for it to run on this, but somehow it's actually running it, you can change the timeout. So like before it decides that like something's broken, because I think most stuff has like a 5-minute. If nothing's changed in 5 minutes, assume it's broken. But you can change that if you need to. Stuff like that. That a copy log, so you can copy to an exact location. That kind of stuff, which really for most end users not a factor whatsoever.
Yeah.
But if you are a reviewer or you're doing a whole bunch of hardware testing, that's what I would want. So that's what I'm making sure is in our applications.
right on.
Let's see. What else is there? I think that's pretty much it. Technically support, if you have a free version, is just, we call it community support, but it's basically like, yeah, try posting on like comments and stuff or hit me up on social media. You can send emails. I try to help people, but there's only so much we can do when it's, not something you're paying for. Versus commercial, you actually do get support. So, if you're having a bunch of issues, because most of the time when people have issues, we have a troubleshooting section that people go through that solves 95% of the issues that people run into. But usually outside of that, oftentimes it's like getting into like, oh, your hardware is actually having problems. And then it turns into doing a little bit of hardware troubleshooting, which is definitely beyond scope. But so that's why we kind of limit that more in-depth stuff to if people have a license.
Right
on. Yeah, let's
see.
see.
We talked about the beta. We got the landing pages. Working on After Effects and DaVinci.
Yeah, and we are still working on updates to a bunch of stuff. We have a couple of known issues. We're hoping to have. Actually, we don't. We just put out a new version yesterday.
Updates already.
Some, bug fixes.
Hey.
not fun updates. But we are working on a fun update version here pretty soon. A lot of stuff for enterprise customers, so people who are doing a lot of stuff who need like offline modes, because right now if you want to activate a license you need internet access. It's like a full on offline mode. Stuff like new version detection, because right now if there's a new version out there, you have no idea unless you download it. So we're going to have a banner up at the top that says like, hey, there's a new version. If you dismiss it, then it goes away for I think like 30 days, and then it might come back. This is another reminder. We are going to be building in a blacklist on the client side for if people have NDA hardware, because there are some things that we know, like pre-launch Intel CPUs, like before they have a real product name, have a specific like string and same thing with NVIDIA, same thing with AMD. So just adding a little thing in there, and even if you have the free version, it'll turn off result upload. Because like if you're using that NDA of hardware, first of all, you should have a licensed version that'll turn it off by default anyway. But second of all, we'd still rather avoid leaks. So we don't want to get sued into oblivion by anybody. So yeah, like that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's some other bugs. Like right now, Premiere Pro Beta isn't detected properly, but Photoshop Beta is. Beta isn't something we intend in having official support of, but we can have unofficial support. Beta is just they change stuff too much.
Yeah.
And sometimes like they'll disable part of their API for one beta build. And it's like, wow, cool. But it's beta. Like they can do whatever they want when it's beta. It's only when it hits release that I really worry about it. But some people like to run beta. So
Yeah.
but yeah. So that's this app. Yeah. And it's going to be exciting to see
really cool.
next year, and like the first half of next year, especially. We're really going to try to get most of these fleshed out. But we still have a lot of work we want to do for like Unreal Engine is a big one that we want to do a whole bunch of tests for. That might end up being like it'll probably be a separate app. It'll probably be like PugetBench for real-time engines or something. I don't know. But it might end up even having like multiple Unreal Engine, like Unreal Engine for virtual production, Unreal Engine for game dev, Unreal Engine for architecture or something kind of thing. I don't know if we'll handle it like on this level or like presets. I'm not sure yet, but because man, Unreal is just it's used in such a wide variety of stuff that like we kind of have to have like separate kind of benchmarks for it.
I mean, I feel like just separating like game dev from virtual production, at a bare minimum, like because those are two just wildly different workflows and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and they changed so much too. Like we'd have to have like completely separate tests for Unreal Engine 5 versus Unreal Engine 4. Was it 4.6? 4.2? I don't know. Unreal's not my exact jam, but I'll be working with Kelly for those. But yeah, like I know they've changed a lot of stuff in the new Unreal Engine 5 that like it might have to have totally different stuff. So we'll just have to see. But that's something I definitely want to get at least like a beta public version for Unreal out in 2024. That'll probably be in an app similar to this.
Cool.
It just won't be 1.0 release, which we'll have to change some of our back-end stuff because right now those beta branches won't be available to people with license, but I'd want it to be available to anybody. So I'm not sure how we'll handle that, but whatever. That's back-end problems.
Before we go, I want to grab this one question. I hope they're still here. Soren Melchior. Do you know if anyone is testing other photographic software such as Capture One Pro, for example? Adobe has become less and less desirable for some of us working professionals still in still photography.
Yeah, Capture One is one that we looked at for a while. Problem is their API is awful, so there's really not much we can do as far as like automation. And that's not just like a Capture One thing. A lot of like smaller, app software that's developed by smaller teams doesn't tend to have as robust of API access like the Adobe ecosystem. So we looked at it. I don't think there's that much we can do about it. I think those kind of applications are just going to have to be for the foreseeable future done by reviewers that focus on photography. I would hope they have their own data sets that they put things through and like they do it manually with a stopwatch kind of a thing. But I think that's probably the only way that stuff is going to be able to be tested. That kind of brings up one of the things though, like, okay, cool, we have a Photoshop benchmark. Should that be the end all be all that anyone should always use? No, I don't think so. I think our benchmark is ideal for like people who are testing something they're not familiar with. Think the big YouTubers that are like tech reviewers, not like photography reviewers. They're like tech reviewers. They don't understand Photoshop, but this way they can at least get useful data out of it. But for someone who actually is like a photography YouTuber or writer, blog poster, I think this is a tool in their toolbox. But I would hope they supplement it with their own data because diversity, especially in these workflows where like how many different rock formats are there? Well, there's a lot. You kind of need that extra layer on top, I think, when you go and get into like really detailed stuff.
Nice. All right. I think that covers everything, right? Anything else you want to mention or?
No, I mean, if you have any feedback on anything, I mean, you can hit us up on Twitter or social media or anywhere. I mean, Houston gets most of that stuff for the official Puget Systems stuff, but he always forwards it on if there's anything. So, and if you have any, issues with it, I mean, just let us know. But really, give it a shot. Download it. The Premiere Pro benchmark. The Premiere Pro benchmark now is actually really fast. We got a lot of optimization done. We were with Adobe of like, how should we be doing this stuff? What's the best way to do this? So it's down to like a 5-minute benchmark now, which is insane for the number of things we're testing.
Great. Yeah.
Photoshop takes quite a bit longer. A lot of the stuff in Photoshop, it's like, yeah, if you test something that takes 1 second versus a real thing that would take normally like 30 seconds, it gives you widely different things, results. So you kind of have to test exactly what people are doing in reality. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
And so it has to take longer. Plus Photoshop has a lot more run-to-run variation. So we do each test 3 times. Premiere is a lot more consistent. So
nice. All right, well, thanks, Matt, for joining us, and thanks everybody in the audience for joining us as well. This is a really good coverage of our new PugetBench for Creators version 1.0. I'm excited to see how things are going to change for the future, and this year in particular, this coming up year, man, this is going to be great. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to chat.
Right on, and I guess that's all. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.
See ya.